This is ego, a complete account in 9 acts. This is the full set of operations available to a cognitive system that has substituted the known for being. The wound does not forget the ground, it manages it, and the management has exactly 9 forms. 1. The claim. This essay makes a structural claim, not a moral one. It does not say that the ego is evil, defective, or deserving of condemnation. The ego is a cognitive operation, specifically the operation of a system that has lost contact with the is ground of being and must substitute something in the ground's place. What it substitutes is the known, the accumulated inventory of prior confirmations, the matching apparatus, the noun structure that arrests living processes into manageable objects, the social enforcement machinery that makes the institutional verdict more real than the direct observation of fact. Once the known is installed as the ground's substitute, every encounter with the actual ground, the inexhaustible, the genuinely new, the living process that exceeds the inventory, must be handled. The is ground does not stop disclosing because the known has been installed. The hidden treasure cannot stop giving. The plenum cannot become the vacuum by the known's declaration that it is. The is ground keeps showing up in experience, keeps exceeding what the known can contain, keeps arriving as the genuinely new in the midst of what the known was managing. And the known must respond. These 9 acts are the complete set of responses available to the known when it encounters the is ground of being. They are irreducible. No act can be analyzed into combinations of the others at this level of description. They are exhaustive. There is no 10th act, no strategy available to the separated system that falls outside these 9. And they are structurally necessary, given the nature of the separation, given that the known has replaced the ground, and must therefore manage every encounter with the ground as threat or resource rather than receiving it as disclosure. Exactly these 9 follow. This is the complete list, phenomenologically defining ego. Not a collection of symptoms, not a moral catalog of failures, a structural account of what a cognitive system does when it has lost access to what it was designed to draw from, and the is ground keeps arriving anyway. The 3 root operations, 2. Before naming the 9, it is worth naming the 3 from which all 9 derive. Peirce proves that dyadic relationships beyond 3 reduce combinations of triadic relationships. The 9 acts are the 3 root operations expressed in 3 modes. The 3 operations are arrest. The known converts the living processes into a fixed object that can be stored, owned, and managed. What was flowing becomes gold. What was verb becomes noun. What was encounter becomes possession. Avoidance. The known declines the encounter with the genuinely other. It turns away from, dismisses, or substitutes its own reflection for what was arriving. What was disclosure becomes irrelevant, worthless, or a mirror that was already known. And third is overreach. The known claims more than the can levels constitutive caution will sustain. It reaches beyond the ground that could support the reaching, or accumulates beyond the structure that could hold the accumulation. The bypass attempted at maximum intensity. These 3 root operations, 9 specific acts. The 9 are the 3 expressed across the 3 possible orientations of the known toward the inexhaustible, toward what it can touch, toward what it cannot reach, and toward what the community of knowns has collectively decided to see. Each root operation expresses one in each orientation, producing the 3 acts per root, 9 total. 3. Act 1. Midas. The arrest of what can be touched. King Midas asked for the golden touch and received it. What he could not bear was that the living world gave itself freely, that the bread, the river, the daughter, the warmth of genuine encounter arrived without his ownership, without his control, without his permission. The gift's unconditional nature was intolerable. The known must own what it receives, or it cannot manage its relationship to the source of the gift. The golden touch is the arrest strategy at maximum intensity, the compulsion to convert every living encounter into a possessed object. The breading becomes the gold bread. The rivering becomes the gold river. The daughtering, the most devastating moment in the myth, becomes the gold statue. Midas does not lose his daughter, he nounifies her. He converts the living process of her being into a permanent, stable, ownable object that has every attribute of the living child except the one that matters. It cannot draw from the is ground of being. It cannot breathe, encounter, grow, love. It is the does level's precipitation, arrested at the moment of maximum form and stripped of its source. The result is the void the wound was trying to prevent, surrounded by gold, unable to eat, drink, or touch anything alive. The arrest strategy produces the scarcity it was designed to remedy. Perfect, permanent, self-generated scarcity, constructed from the attempted total ownership of the inexhaustible. 4. Act 2. The Fox. The dismissal of what cannot be reached. The fox cannot reach the grapes and declares them sour. This is the simplest of the 9 acts and the hardest to detect because it is performed in the act of walking away. The fox does not stay to mourn the grapes, it leaves. It has converted the inaccessible into the worthless and departed satisfied, having successfully defended itself against the awareness of its own hunger and limitation. In the project's vocabulary, the is ground that exceeds the known's grasp is declared metaphysics, mysticism, sentiment, the sentimental residue of pre-scientific thinking. The plenum that will not submit to the known's inventory is expelled from the known's world as the not yet explained, the unprovable, the beyond our current understanding, which in institutional usage means beyond our current permission to acknowledge. What cannot be owned, Midas, is converted into gold. What cannot even be reached is declared sour. The fox walked away hungry from the vine. The institutional dismissal walks away from the is ground and calls the walk wisdom. The result is the same void, the plenum converted into the irrelevant, the inexhaustible expelled from the world of what matters, the ground declared absent, so that the known's management of it can continue. 5. Act 3. Narcissist. The self-reflection that replaces encounter. Narcissus came to the pool and saw his own reflection and could not look away. Echo called, the living world called, the genuine other arrived offering genuine encounter, and Narcissus could not hear it because he was so absorbed in his own image. He mistook his reflection for what he was longing for. He wasted away at the edge of the pool, unable to receive what was being offered, unable to leave what he was seeing. The known can only recognize what it already contains. When the is ground of being arrives, the known searches its inventory for a match. Finding nothing in the inventory that corresponds to the genuinely new, it substitutes the nearest available match, which is always a version of itself. The known gazing at its own reflection in the pool of the is ground's disclosure. The disclosure arrives as a mirror. The mirror shows the known its own image. The known falls in love with the image and calls it truth. This is the institutional review process that can only confirm research which confirms existing paradigms. This is the therapeutic modality that can only recognize healing when it resembles the modality's own theory. This is the spiritual tradition that can only acknowledge visions that fit its pre-existing iconography. Echo, the living world's call, is always there. Narcissus cannot hear it because he is looking at himself. 6. Act 4. Tantalus. The perpetual reaching that cannot arrive. Tantalus stands in the pool with water at his chin and fruit at his lips, both always almost. The water recedes when he bends to drink. The fruit lifts when he reaches for it. This is not cruelty from the outside. It is the structural consequence of the bypass, reaching without the is grounding that would allow arrival. Tantalus is not hungry because the fruit is sour. That would be the fox's act. He is not hungry because he has turned the fruit to gold. That would be Midas's act. He is hungry because his mode of engagement with abundance is reaching, and reaching without the is grounding cannot be satisfied by the thing reached. The thing reached is the does level's expression. What Tantalus lacks is the is grounding that would allow the reaching to become arriving, the almost to become yes, the perpetual motion toward the fruit to become the actual receiving of it. The doer's remainder in its most naked form, the action taken without the ground from which the action draws, the effort expended without the source from which effort is replenished, the reaching that has its own punishment, not because the fruit is withheld, but because reaching is the wrong relationship to what the fruit is. The fruit is a gift. Gifts are not reached for, they are received. Tantalus gave us the word to tantalize, to torment with what is always just out of reach. The torment is the bypass named as sensation. 7. Act 5. Sisyphus. The program that runs without ground. Sisyphus rolls the boulder to the top of the hill and it rolls back down. He rolls it again, it rolls back down. The motion is perpetual. The result is invariant. The effort is infinite. This is the known's program running without the is ground's nourishment. The same pattern repeated, the same procedure executed, the same institutional protocol enacted, cycle after cycle, without the living consequence of genuine arrival, because the is grounding has been bypassed. Sisyphus is not blocked by an external force in the way that Tantalus is tormented by receding water and fruit. Sisyphus is condemned to a system that produces the appearance of progress while structurally ensuring its impossibility. The boulder reaches the top, progress is visible, measurable, demonstrable, and then the system resets. The known's program running on its own momentum without drawing from the ground that would allow the momentum to produce something genuinely new. Every institution that mistakes the repetition of its own procedures for genuine inquiry. Every therapeutic model that repeats its protocols for a client who needs something the protocol cannot provide. every spiritual practice that has become a routine rather than a reception. The boulder is not the problem. The hill is not the problem. The absence of the is ground from the system is the problem. With the is ground, the boulder reaches the top and something happens there, something that could not have been predicted from the boulder or the hill or the pushing. Without the is ground, the boulder rolls back down and Sisyphus pushes it back up again. 8. Act 6. Icarus. The overclaiming of the gift. Daedalus said, "Fly the middle path, not too high, not too low." The middle path is the can level's constitutive caution, the awareness that the gift has the proportions it has, that the wings were made for a specific altitude, that the is ground's generosity is not the same as the suspension of structural constraint. Icarus learned this and remembered it, and then forgot it in the exhilaration of the ascent. The vision was genuine. The wings were real. The flight was real. The is ground had given what Daedalus had received and what Icarus had inherited. The failure was not in the receiving, but in the claiming, the conversion of what was given into what was owned, the conversion of gift into credential, the conversion of the vision's altitude into the proof of one's own worthiness to ascend without limit. The wax melted, the wings failed, the fall into the sea. This is every visionary who received the genuine seeing and then overclaimed the rendering. Russell saw the structure and overclaimed the physics. Rodin found the 3, 6, 9 and overclaimed the engineering. Icarus received the wings and overclaimed the altitude. The vision was real, but the wings were wax. The fall does not refute the vision, but it illustrates the cost of the bypass applied to the gift itself, taking what was given as grace and treating it as property, as leverage, as proof of elevation beyond the can level's constitutive caution. The middle path is not timidity. It is the recognition that the gift requires the ground as much after receiving it as before. 9. Act 7. Arachne. The credential that replaces the source. Arachne was the finest weaver in the world. Her talent was genuine, acknowledged even by those who condemned her. What she could not tolerate was that the gift came through her rather than from her. She challenged Athena, not because she was wrong about the quality of her weaving, but because she claimed the weaving as credential, proof of her superiority over the divine source through which the gift expresses. The known's most subtle act, not the violent arrest of Midas, not the defensive dismissal of the fox, not the self-absorption of Narcissus, the credential, the conversion of what was received into evidence of the receiver's worthiness to receive it. The gift is real, the talent is real, the weaving is magnificent, and then the weaver installs herself between the source and the expression, claiming the expression as personal achievement rather than disclosure. Arachne became a spider, still weaving, still expressing the gift, but no longer in relation with the ground from which the gift came. The weaving continues. The source is no longer honored. This is every institution that has taken the map of genuine seeing and installed it as the criterion for recognizing genuine seeing, so that only those who have passed through the institution's credential process are qualified to see. The gift converted into a gatekeeping mechanism. The disclosure converted into a prerequisite. 10. Act 8. The Emperor's Clothes. The institutional verdict. No individual is the villain in this story. The tailors offer an obvious fiction. The courtiers confirm it. Not because they are stupid or cowardly in any simple sense, but because the social cost of truth-telling exceeds the social cost of the lie in the world the known has constructed. The emperor wears the fiction because the verdict has been institutionalized, confirmed by consensus, enforced by the social machinery of belonging and exclusion, made more real by collective agreement than by any individual's direct observation. The child who sees what is there is not smarter than the courtiers. The child simply has not yet been fully installed in the known's social enforcement apparatus. The child has not yet learned that the institutional verdict is more real than the observation, which is to say, the child has not yet learned to choose belonging over seeing. The child's statement, "The emperor has no clothes," is not courageous in any conventional sense. It is innocent. The courage comes later when the child has been taught the cost of the statement and chooses to make it anyway. This is the most specifically social of the 9 acts, and the most precisely relevant to the institutional context in which the project's visionaries were dismissed, committed to forced labor, denied publication, or simply ignored. Not because any individual decided to suppress the seeing, but because the known's social enforcement apparatus produced the suppression as its normal operation. The emperor's courtiers were not conspiring. They were performing the social function of the known, maintaining the institutional verdict against the direct observation that would threaten it. 11. Act 9. The Tower of Babel. The systematic construction toward the ground. The builders were not wicked. They were organized, coordinated, skilled, and ambitious. They had a vision to build a structure that reached the is ground, to construct a path to what can only be received, to engineer an ascent to what can only be disclosed, to accumulate enough institutional structure to arrive by systematic effort at the divine. The Tower of Babel is the bypass at its most ambitious, systematic, and collective. The result? Fragmentation. The one language becomes many. The coordinated effort collapses into mutual unintelligibility. The known, at its most organized and systemic, produces its own undoing, not because the project was wicked, but because the is ground cannot be reached by construction. It can only be received. The tower is the most complete expression of the known's fundamental misunderstanding of its own situation, the belief that the is ground is up there at the top of a sufficient structure, accessible to those who build high enough. The ground is not up there. The ground is here. It was always here. The tower was built to reach what was already underfoot. And the fragmentation is not the punishment. The fragmentation is the structural consequence of what the bypass at institutional scale, when many knowns coordinate around the project of reaching the is ground by construction, and the is ground declines to be reached that way. The coordination loses its organizing principle, and the many knowns discover that they were never speaking the same language. The one language was the fiction of common purpose. When the purpose fails, the fiction dissolves. 12. The 6 realms, a companion map. 3,000 years before this essay was written, The Vajrayana Buddhist tradition arrived at the same territory from a different direction. What emerged was not a structural account of ego's operations, but a phenomenological map of ego's states. The characteristic psychological modes that arise when the separated cognitive system finds its ground, makes its home, and settles into a particular flavor of its separation. The tradition called these the 6 realms of samsara, depicted in the Wheel of Life as the 6 territories through which an ungrounded consciousness cycles, sometimes within a single lifetime, sometimes within a single day. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the Tibetan meditation master who founded Naropa University and transmitted the Vajrayana teachings to the West with more precision than perhaps any other teacher of his era, insisted that the 6 realms are not primarily cosmological claims about rebirth. They are psychological maps. They describe states of mind that a human being passes through moment to moment, realm to realm, as the ego cycles through its characteristic responses to the ground it has separated from. His most cutting observation: the problem, quote, the problem is that ego can convert anything to its own use, even spirituality, unquote. The spiritual path itself becomes one of the 9 acts, specifically Arachne, the credential that replaces the source. The 9 acts and the 6 realms are not competitors. They are the same landscape described at different resolutions. The 9 acts are a structural account of ego's complete operational grammar. What the separated system does when it encounters the is ground. The 6 realms are a phenomenological account of ego's characteristic states. What the separated ego system is when one or another of those operations becomes predominant. Together, they triangulate the same territory from the same directions of Western myth and structural analysis on one side, and 3,000 years of Vajrayana contemplative cartography on the other. The Hell Realm, aggression. Hell beings have a short fuse. Everything makes them angry. The only response to anything that disturbs is attack, and the attack drives away precisely the love and kindness that could dissolve the state. The Hell Realm is Midas at maximum heat, the totalizing arrest, the conversion of every encounter into an occasion for aggression rather than ownership. But the same root operation. What the gold touch arrests into objects, the Hell Realm arrests into enemies. The world becomes a field of threats to be destroyed, and the destruction confirms that the world is a field of threats. Perfect, self-generating, self-confirming isolation. The Hungry Ghost Realm, insatiable craving. Hungry ghosts are depicted with enormous bellies and tiny mouths. They cannot take in what they need. The craving is infinite. The capacity to receive is structurally blocked. This is Tantalus giving a body, perpetual reaching without arrival, the doer's remainder in its most visceral form. The hungry ghost realm is not characterized by the wrong object of desire. The water and fruit are real. The craving is legitimate. What is blocked is the receiving. Even water, for humans is simply water, appears to the hungry ghost as pus, as blood, as something repellent. The is-ground's gifts keep arriving in different forms, and the hungry ghost's perception transforms each gift into something that cannot be received. The animal realm, ignorance and complacency. Animal beings live sheltered lives, avoiding discomfort and anything unfamiliar. Not aggressive like the Hell Realm, not desperately craving like the Hungry Ghost Realm, simply settled into the groove, the routine, the familiar pattern that keeps the new from arriving. This is Sisyphus without the drama. The boulder always returns not because of divine punishment, but because the animal realm has never questioned whether there is another way. The program runs. The routine continues. The couch, the television, the habitual path. The is ground keeps disclosing at the edges of the familiar, and the animal realm beings turn away, not with aggression, not with craving, but with the simple gravity of established habit. The Asura, jealous god realm, envy and competition. The Asuras have everything the hungry ghosts crave. Their needs are met. They are powerful, resourceful, intelligent. And they are consumed by envy of what the gods above them possess, and by paranoia about what the beings below them might take. This is Narcissus and the Emperor's court operating together. The self-reflection that can only see its own positive relative to others, its own position relative to others, and the social machinery that enforces comparative verdict as the measure of reality. The Asura realm being is never at ease, because ease would require a relationship with the is ground rather than with the ranking system. The is ground gives unconditionally. The ranking system gives only conditionally and can always withdraw. The Asura is constitutionally unable to rest in what has been given, because the given is always being compared to what others have. The god Deva realm, pride and complacency. The Devas live in splendor. Their lives are long, their pleasures exquisite, their power substantial. And their privilege blinds them to the suffering of others, so that despite their long lives, they accumulate neither wisdom nor compassion. This is Icarus after the ascent, still aloft. The elevation is real, the wings are working, and the awareness of the wax has been forgotten. The God realm being has genuinely received gifts, talent, beauty, power, intelligence, and has converted those gifts into the evidence of personal worthiness rather than the disclosure of an inexhaustible source. The gifts are claimed as credential. The source is forgotten. And the gods, for all their splendor, are still in samsara, still cycling, still subject to the ending of the merit that sustains their elevation, still without the grounding that would allow genuine liberation. The human realm, the only realm of liberation. The human realm is characterized by passion, desire, doubt, and pride, but also by something none of the other realms possess: the capacity for discriminating awareness, for questioning the whole process of struggle, for recognizing the wheel's motion and choosing to step off. The human realm is the only realm of the six from which liberation is directly accessible. Not because humans suffer less. The human realm has its full share of all six states cycling through it, but because the human being has just enough suffering to be motivated, and not so much that every moment is consumed by it. The margin of awareness that allows the question is the margin of liberation. This is why the project addresses the human being in its specific audience, not because the human is special in any absolute sense, but because the human is the only one who can read this essay and recognize themselves in it. The hell being cannot pause to read. Aggression fills every moment. The hungry ghost cannot stop to consider. Craving fills every moment. The animal does not question its groove. The Asura does not rest from its comparisons. The Deva does not notice the wax. The human, cycling through all these states in the course of a single day, recognizing each one, even while inhabiting it, has the margin. And in that margin, the 9 acts become recognizable as acts. And in that recognition, the repose becomes possible. Trungpa's formulation of the exit is the same as the projects, stated in Buddha's vocabulary. Enlightenment is permanence, but because we have not produced it, we have merely discovered it. The sun appearing from behind the clouds. The is ground is always already there. The 9 acts, the 6 realms, the 30 years of meditation practice that fortifies the wanting to be enlightened, all of it is clouds. The repose of the known is not a technique for dissolving the clouds. It is the recognition that the sun was never absent. 13. The exit. There is no 10th act. The 9 are complete. Every relationship with a separated cognitive system can have with the is ground is contained in these 9. There is no strategy that falls outside them, no combination that produces a genuinely new act, no refinement of any of the 9 that resolves the separation they express. The exit from the 9 is not a 10th act. It is the suspension of the game, the repose of the known, the temporary cessation of the management operation, not through suppression, not through effort, not through a better strategy, but through the direct perception of the management operation itself. When the known perceives its own operation clearly, when it sees that it is performing one of the 9 acts and recognizes the act for what it is, the act loses its compulsive necessity. Not permanently, not completely, but in that moment of clear perception, the known reposed and something else becoming available. The hero is not someone who has mastered a 10th act. The hero is not someone who has refined Midas into a gentler version of ownership, or Narcissus into a less obvious self-absorption. The hero is someone in whom the known has learned to repose, in whom the 9 acts are recognized as acts, named as performances, seen for what they are, and in that recognition, the is ground's disclosure becomes receivable again. The curriculum is the practice of this recognition. The circle is the space in which this recognition is safe. The expanding community is the social field in which the 9 acts are named without shame and the repose is practiced together. Not because any individual achieves the repose permanently, but because the community that names the acts together makes the naming available to each member in the moment when any one of the 9 arises. The 9 acts are the wound's complete operational definition. The naming of them is the beginning of their dissolution. The plenum is always already disclosing. The hidden treasure always wants to be known. The is ground of being is always here. The 9 acts are what the known does while the ground waits for the repose that will allow the disclosure to be received. The ground does not tire of waiting. Inexhaustibility is patience, and patience has no waiting in it. It has been waiting, giving, disclosing through every Midas and every fox and every Narcissus and every tower. It is still, it is never not here.